Yarborough, should we do one more?
One more.
Okay.
One more song.
One more song.
This here's a Magnetic Field song.
It's time to put this away.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
I'm sure the siblings will be offering up their CDs near the cigarette lines after class. When we go to the ash pot, they'll be digging through them.
I mean, work is work. I'll see myself out.
They bring these instruments, but never anything to take notes on. So, speaking of that, I want to make sure all cell phones are off. I do want to let you know I'm your substitute professor here today, Professor Yarborough. I do have an MA in Women's Studies, and I did have an article published, Hat the Bunny and Children's Indoctrination to the Subjugation of Female Genitalia. Dr. Gupta has asked me here today, he wants to send his apologies and wanted to assure all of you that he did not test positive for rabies, and he should have function of the right side of his face by class next time. So where's my TA? I did not get a chance to look at the notes that Dr. Gupta left us, but I'm sure everything will be just fine. I'm sure it will be just fine. Now, as you know, today's lesson, 5 out of 4 elephants prefer bananas to peanuts. Oh. Today's lesson is about improbability. Who can tell me what was improbable about that statement?
5 out of 4.
Very good. You have passed your basic algebra math class. Now, we also know that this is a mixture in zoology, so we do want to talk about the olfactory system of elephants. As we know that there are an array of mammals, somebody name me the smallest mammal that you have studied.
Shrew.
Shrew. So we have a shrew. It's small. Then we have an elephant, which is large. Late for class, of course. Late for class. Now, we have been talking recently, there's been a lot of research about the emotional life of these animals. Of course, we do not give much credit to the shrew. According to the CDC, about 130 people die every day because of opioid overdose. This is also common amongst the shrew. So we as humans are about in the middle right there. We have an opioid issue. In the shrew, it is fermented grub. Now, one of the interesting things about these fermented grubs is they only grow in one area. They grow in the American Southwest, which is also, interestingly, a high case for the hantavirus. And it is worth noting that kangaroo rats have an issue with barrel cactus. So as we see, this is an across-mammal phenomenon. Even with the shrew that does not have very many addiction receptors, it does go all the way up to the elephant. Now the elephant does have to choose between bananas and peanuts. It is very much like the human choice between opioids and meth. Each of them have different effects upon the mammalian system. The longest running American sci-fi show is Red vs. Blue, produced by Rooster Teeth. Now I bring this up because in one of the machinime, there was a very good short story, a sub-thing about the two sides. Now Red, who went by the name Red. Red is how it is pronounced. Know your place, TA. Oh. So, Red was trying to consider how to access the tank. What? Blue was trying to figure out how to access the trenches. And each of them needed the drive to get from one into the other. And this is only aided by fortification. They had to pick their own substance. Individuals with at least one parent who teaches display and individuals with only one parent who teaches display an elevated risk of following a teaching profession. Now it's time to bring forth a personal tale of addiction within my family. As we know, teachers suffer from very improbable situations. First, one of them is getting some goddamn funding. Another one is having some time for themselves. And a third one is they are all drunks. I've seen this. I come from a long generation of teachers. Now, is it always alcohol? Not necessarily. Previous generations was a lot of Valium. Recent generations will have things, due to the money situation, will have things affordable, such as cans of beer, such brands as Red Dog. Some of you are teachers, I hear from you. So, and then this is known as a coping mechanism. Now let's go back to the shrew. People think of names based off the first object they see that day. And when the original progenitors were naming the shrew, good Lord, couldn't the junior college spared for some decent markers here? The legend has it that the shrew was initially identified by the Abyssinians, who are also known for cats. Oh yeah. The original Abyssinian cats did have a fatty patch on the back of their necks. This is how they maintained their life in very harsh weather. Well, the story of it being is that when the Abyssinians first, it was Harold the Elder. Give me a form. Harold the Elder was legendary, known for naming the first shrew. He was out walking along, and he saw, and many of us know, that the primary food for shrews in ancient times was feces. So as the man, and we know there's universal words for this item, as the man was walking along, he saw this strange creature sitting next to its food source, and he went, shrew. Now, over the generations, that has been shortened to shrew. And back to our addiction, shrews do have a rather complex society. Very much like the naked mole rats, which, by the way, never handle a naked mole rat with a naked hand. They will dig right through it. And you'll have to get tetanus shots. So, Yellowstone National Park was the first national park in the world. It also is known for having a sanctuary for addicted animals. Now they do have a rather high shrew population. Perhaps the most seen is the elk. The elk do find themselves captured with pine. Pine is their choice. As the piney pines fall in the fall, they do land on the ground and they ferment for some time. So by the time the summertime rolls around, rutting season comes around, there is a very popular mating ritual where the males will go to the rutting bar. They will have their fermented pines, and it gives them the fortitude to face off one another for the rut. Now, interestingly, this is also the height of tourist season. And as we know, humans have a big problem with opioids, which leads to a lot of photographers getting out of their damn cars when they shouldn't. This is again where the theme of addiction comes throughout the mammals. Now, we used to think it was improbable that we had such a through thread. Mammals, for a long time, men thought themselves as being better than all other creatures because the monotheistic pattern said that we are the caretakers of the world, and therefore the world is for our use. There ain't no devil, it's just God when he's drunk. Ladies and gentlemen, let's speak on communion wine. As we know that the monotheistic religions say that the wine is a major part of it, particularly in Christianity, they say that it is the transmorphed blood of Christ. There's his little feet crossed over, there's water and blood that comes out of the side, the apostles, and then served to all the apostles as a dare. It was to help them deal with the loss of this man that had brought them leadership. This is where, now we speak of the Last Supper, but it was actually in the coping with the loss of the man that communion became such a major part of those religions. As we know, Catholics will actually use actual wine, Methodists will use grape juice because they're very neutral about many things. Matter couldn't have created itself. What created the first pieces of matter, what created the first pieces of matter, no matter how big or small? Oh. As we know, all of you that have been reading your Joseph Campbell this year, that you know that there are common themes throughout the religions. Who can name me one of the drunk deities of a religion?
Bacchus!
Bacchus! Which we knew came out of Zeus's thigh, which was gross. Hence the reason that he had to drink to deal with his own creation. Who can name me another god?
Thor!
Thor! Who was always hammered. Another?
Dionysus.
What was that?
Dionysus.
Dionysus. Which is also Bacchus. They were in a fraternity together. So as we see, it goes through, particularly on the European end of the scale, there's a lot of drunkenness working in. Oh, for the love of Christ, I'm not reading that. Math nerd. The bones of the garfish are green. Now, it is interesting that when we get into the fish, into the sea dwellers, we find a very unique taste in intoxications. In particular, river gar, alligator gar in particular, we know that they rise to the surface and they roll and then they go back underwater. So this is how they show their presence. This is how they disrupt prey so that it can be found out. We have also discovered that the green bones come from a heavy presence of absinthe. Now, many people believe there have been, I believe it was Jackson Riddle that was doing research on the communication styles of various fish. Fish. What was it? Talking. And he learned that before the gars came together over, it could be anything so much as a muddy spot in the bottom of the river. It could be under a blue crab somewhere that was hanging out. Wherever the absinthe was stashed, they would have a very, very clear call that spoke to one another. Yiffing is the act of two or more individuals wearing animal costumes engaging in sexual intercourse. This is where the professor's studies came into an interesting challenge. Because he found out after publishing his papers about the presence of the green fairy, so to speak, in the underwater beings, that they found that about half of the representation of God were actually humans participating in a very, humans with very strong lungs participating in an interesting ritual. This explains the rolling on the surface because the humans did have to air to get some oxygen and have another drink. Sawdust is wood. Let us go into insects. We are going to talk about termites now. Termites, I did not ask from you, TA. Termites, very much like the naked mole rats, do have a very complex system. They live in very large mounds. There within, there's usually a cavity where the queen is just spitting and spitting and spitting and spitting out eggs. There's just a giant pile of eggs right there. And then all the workers have to take the eggs to the chambers to get nourished. As you know, this is a very exhausting process, and that is why they too get involved in the pine wood. Now, it is recently being discovered that there is a strong connection between elk and pine wood. So back to our studies in Yellowstone, in the First National Park, they did all sorts of testing to see what the intoxicants are. Now, as we said, we do know that there is a big presence of pine. Pine is the common thing. But there is a new study out by Melissa Smith, PhD, MFA, BAMF. She is a badass motherfucker. And she recently discovered that it is not just the pines, it is actually the mineral waters that grow within. That geyser, that Old Faithful, which is about as faithful as any old man is. Actually, the spew from the Old Faithful is the seed that is cast in order to make the drunken this. Secondhand smoking is worse than actually smoking. There are many ways that the termites take in the pine. One of them, as you can imagine, is smoking. Now, this is where we find generations being affected. In populations that have a high pine access, we discover that the youths are born with a poor sense of direction. This is due to the exposure of the pine. Now, interesting in elks as well, we do see a similar. The elks, however, have a tendency to chew. And what we find is that that chew is passed in the milk of the elk into the babes, which are somehow able to walk within 24 hours, but still manage to not avoid cars and campus. The Andromeda Galaxy and the Milky Way Galaxy will collide in 4 billion years. Now, the good news for all of of us is we are all going to be destroyed in 20 years. So we do not have to worry about that, but we do know that there will be a population, there will be a new population in existence that will extend beyond us. Now I want to go back, a little ways back. I want to talk about the phenomenon of seeded cultures. And when we talk about seeded cultures, we're talking about cultures that they believe was actually seeded by alien intelligence. What all these seeded cultures have are pyramids of various shapes. We have what we know of as the Egyptian pyramids, we all know those. They're very cleanly lined. And then we do have, in Europe, we have some very simple pyramids that are basically underground. And then we have, in Mexico and South America, we have these very convoluted pyramids. Now people have wondered why they do not have smooth sides like the other pyramids. Drunk. What naturally growing substances do we know are very common in Mexico and South America? Cocaine. Another one?
Marijuana.
Marijuana. Mezcal. Mezcal, can we agree on that one? Mezcal. Mushrooms.
Peyote.
Yeah.
Potatoes.
Peyote.
Potatoes.
Potatoes are actually a very important part of this process. There has been a lot of research in Mexico. A lot of research in Mexico. Many educators are clamoring to go study this subject in Mexico. So, though there is many opinions ad nauseum, I do want to mention that Michael Pollan is one of the people that have just done this. Yes, the guy who wrote about food rules also recently wrote a book where he took a bunch of drugs and talked about it. This was also popular among the beat poets. But Michael Pollan is a scientist, so we give him more weight. You may wonder how a culture that has this much access to one another does not fall apart, because we know the South American, the Mexican cultures were very, very strong until white people came over and ruined everything. It is starch. It is starch that kept people going. We had the corn, we had the wapato, and various forms of potatoes, sweet potatoes, and the likes as such. And this is what balanced out everything. This is how we all came to a conclusion that these people built these fantastic pyramids. They were mathematical geniuses. I'm sure my math nerd has some sort of ancestry. But speaking of ancestry, old white male authors dislike being outsold by dead female authors. I cannot concur with this enough! You're probably wondering what this has to do with our studies of improbability and addiction. Well, first of all, the fact that I'm going to tie this together is highly improbable. I do want to take a moment to talk about the Brownings. We're talking Robert Browning and Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Who knows about them? Who knows about them? Raise your hands. Okay, you've all made it through English 101. Well, there is a very, very strong theory that Robert Browning actually caused for the death of Elizabeth because he became jealous of her success of songs of the Portuguese. They were songs of the Portuguese. Correct me in here. What this led to was, again, this man had to deal with himself. He had to take care of himself. This brought us to opiates. Again, the defining trait of humans. Now we're getting close to our conclusion. Let's see. Fraternity hazing is illegal, but graduate school has been slower to change. And interestingly enough, fraternity hazing does have a lot of the drinking involved with that. Graduate school, as we know, many of these graduates are dealing with educational purposes. So it is a culture wherein drinking and self-medication is justified. Also, cocaine. Because how the hell else do they stay awake? Now, I do want to take a quick moment to tie this together. Climate change is in part a failure of birth control. So we know rodents, higher population in numbers to humans. Humans, higher population in numbers to elephants. Levels of addiction, small, medium, off the charts. Shrews are fornicating constantly. Constantly. That is why there are wide numbers. And this is due to the presence of pine. Pine is equal to fertility. In many folk traditions, it is meant to represent the man, it is meant to represent fertility. Now let's go to people. People are making large numbers. They take up more space, they're making large numbers. And as we know, being drunk is a major part of the mating ritual for adults. And then we see that there is a theme that in families that have children of 3 or more, there is a hefty dose of drinking to deal with it. With the exception of the Mormon Church, which abstain from any sort of addictive substances, but my goodness, they are just high on life. Finally, with elephants, we do not see a lot of addiction among the elephants. We do have the choice between the banana and the peanut. The peanuts were introduced by humans, so that is an enslavement, once again, by the white man. But the bananas are found, what you will find is that they have a smaller population, but their families are very closely drawn together. It is a very tight family unit, and we can all learn from the empathy of the elephant. Now, are the humans going to learn from the empathy of the elephant? Highly, highly improbable. But this is your homework, is to try to figure ways that you can work with elephant society and introduce it to human society at large. Now, before we wrap up, do we have any questions? Or is that... Any questions?
Yes. Will this all be on the test?
A majority of it will be on the test, but I will say that Dr. Gupta, even though he did not catch rabies, the shots that they gave him is a little questionable. Also, as we know, Dr. Gupta is an educator. So knowing what is actually on the test for anyone is highly improbable. All right, students, that's all for the class. Once again, I want to tell you that the Shays are going to be hitching their wares outside. They got to pay for college somehow. I also want to